My beloved child, before you hear anything else, understand this clearly. What you are about to feel is not coincidence, not imagination, and not something your mind created to comfort you. Because last night, at the exact moment when silence was wrapping the world and most people were lost in sleep, something shifted in the heart of the one who once knew you deeper than anyone else ever could. Your soulmate. The one who stood at the altar just yesterday, smiled in front of everyone, said the vows, accepted a life that looked perfect from the outside. But inside, something never aligned, something never agreed, something never chose that moment fully. Because even while they said, "I do," a part of them was whispering your name in a place no one else could hear. And last night, that whisper turned into something louder, something uncontrollable, something they could no longer silence. They called your name. Not casually, not accidentally, but with a weight that carried regret, confusion, and an emotion they thought they had buried forever. And you may not have heard it physically, you may not have seen your phone light up or felt a message arrive, but your energy felt it, your soul reacted to it, because some connections do not need distance or time or even logic to exist. They just do. And what makes this moment so powerful is not the fact that they got married, but the truth that even after choosing someone else in front of the world, they could not disconnect from you in the one place that matters the most. Their inner reality. Because people can control actions, they can force decisions, they can follow expectations, but they cannot command the heart to forget what it has already recognized as home. And that is what you were to them. Not just a person, not just a phase, not just a memory, but a feeling that refused to fade even when everything around them demanded that it should. Yesterday, they tried to convince themselves that this was the right step, that stability matters more than emotion, that peace can be built even without passion, that moving forward means letting go. But last night proved something entirely different. It proved that no matter how far they try to go, no matter how strong they pretend to be, no matter how perfectly they play their role in front of others, you are still there, existing in the spaces they cannot control, appearing in the thoughts they did not invite, echoing in the silence they cannot escape. And that is why your name came out. Not because they wanted to disturb your life, not because they planned to reach out, but because something inside them broke through the walls they had built. And when something is real, it does not ask for permission to return. It just does. And you might be wondering why this is happening now, why after a marriage, after a final decision, after what should have been closure, everything is resurfacing again. And the answer is simple but difficult to accept. Because what they chose yesterday was a life that looked right, but what they felt last night was a truth that never left. And the difference between those two things is what is tearing them apart right now. Because when a person realizes too late that they walked away from something irreplaceable, the regret does not come slowly. It hits all at once, it disrupts their peace, it questions every decision, it forces them to confront a reality they tried to ignore. And that is exactly where they are now. Standing between a commitment they just made and a connection they never truly ended. And in that conflict, your presence becomes louder than ever. Not because you are trying to return, but because they never fully left you in the first place. And this is not about them coming back instantly or making dramatic changes overnight. This is deeper than that. This is about the shift that has already begun inside them. The realization that something is missing, the awareness that something feels incomplete, the quiet understanding that the life they just stepped into does not carry the same depth they once experienced with you. And these realizations do not disappear. They grow, they evolve, they intensify over time. Because once the truth reveals itself, it cannot be unseen. And right now, they are at the beginning of that realization. Confused, overwhelmed, and silently questioning everything. While you are here, feeling a strange pull, a subtle shift, an unexplainable connection that made you pause, that made you think of them without any clear reason. And that is not random. That is the echo of what happened last night. Because when two souls are connected beyond logic, even the smallest emotional surge from one side can be felt on the other. And you felt it. Maybe as restlessness, maybe as curiosity, maybe as a sudden memory that refused to leave your mind. But you felt it. And the reason this matters is not to pull you back into the past, not to make you wait, not to create false hope, but to show you the truth of what you meant. Because in a world where people move on quickly, where connections are replaced easily, where feelings are often temporary, you were not something that could be replaced. You were something that stayed. Even when they tried to walk away, even when they chose someone else, even when they convinced themselves that it was over, you stayed. Not physically, not actively, but energetically, emotionally, deeply. And that kind of presence does not disappear just because circumstances change. It remains until it is understood, until it is acknowledged, until it is either healed or confronted. And right now, they are being forced to confront it. Not by you, not by anyone else, but by their own heart. Because the heart always returns to what is real, no matter how far the mind tries to run. And as this unfolds, you must remember something important. This is not your moment to chase, not your moment to interfere, not your moment to lose yourself in what they are going through. This is your moment to observe, to understand, to recognize your worth. Because the fact that they called your name after marrying someone else does not mean you are an option. It means you were the truth they could not replace. And there is a difference between those two things. A powerful difference. And as time moves forward, more will be revealed, more will surface, more truths will come into light. But for now, just know this. Last night was not ordinary. It was the beginning of something they can no longer ignore. And whether they admit it or not, whether they act on it or not, you are still a part of their story. In a way that cannot be erased, cannot be rewritten, and cannot be forgotten. Because some connections are not meant to end cleanly. They are meant to transform, to challenge, to awaken. And this is that moment. The moment where everything they thought was settled begins to unravel. Because of you. And what you meant to them. And what you still are. And now, what you didn't see, what no one around them could possibly understand, is what happened after that moment when your name escaped their lips. Because it didn't end there, it didn't just fade into the night like a passing thought. It stayed, it lingered, it grew heavier with every second they tried to ignore it. They froze in that silence, realizing something had just slipped out that they had been holding back for far too long, and in that exact moment, the reality they had been trying to build since the wedding started to crack. Not loudly, not in a way others could notice, but internally. Deeply. In a way that shook them more than anything else could. Because they knew what it meant. They knew that calling your name wasn't just a mistake, it wasn't just a memory resurfacing, it was a truth breaking through. And once that truth comes out, it doesn't go back in. It begins to demand attention, it begins to question everything, it begins to rewrite the story they thought they had already finalized. And they sat there, maybe in the dark, maybe next to someone who now carries their last name, maybe surrounded by a life that looks complete. But inside, nothing felt settled anymore. Because in that quiet moment, they realized something terrifying. They realized that they had just committed to a future while still being emotionally tied to a past that refuses to become a past. And that kind of realization doesn't bring peace. It brings conflict, it brings guilt, it brings a storm of thoughts that don't let a person rest. Because now every smile they gave during the wedding starts to feel like a performance. Every promise they made begins to echo differently, every step forward starts to feel like it was taken while looking back. And that is where they are right now. Caught between what they chose and what they truly feel. And the more they try to suppress it, the stronger it becomes. Because emotions that are real don't disappear under pressure. They evolve under silence. They become louder in the absence of distraction. And that is exactly what is happening. Last night was just the beginning. Today, the thoughts are returning again, stronger, clearer, harder to ignore. They are replaying moments with you, not intentionally, but uncontrollably. Remembering the way you understood them without explanation, the way conversations felt effortless, the way your presence brought something no one else has been able to replicate. And that comparison, that silent comparison is what is slowly breaking the illusion they tried to create. Because when someone experiences something genuine, something rare, something deeply aligned, anything less than that starts to feel incomplete. No matter how perfect it looks on paper. And they are starting to see that now. Not because they want to, but because they cannot avoid it anymore. And this realization is not comfortable. It is not something they can easily accept. Because accepting it means questioning a decision they just made, a commitment that involves other people, other expectations, other consequences. And that is why they are struggling. Because part of them wants to push this away, to convince themselves that it's just a phase, that it will pass, that they can settle into this new life and everything will eventually feel normal. But another part of them, a stronger part, knows that what they felt last night was not temporary. It was a reminder of something they never truly let go of. And reminders like that don't come without purpose. They come to awaken, to reveal, to force a person to face what they have been avoiding. And right now, they are being forced to face you. Not physically, not directly, but emotionally, internally, in a way that is more powerful than any conversation could ever be. And while this is happening on their side, something is shifting on yours as well. You may feel a strange sense of awareness, like something is unfolding behind the scenes, like a chapter you thought was closed is somehow being reopened without your involvement. And that feeling is real. Because energy does not lie. Connection does not disappear just because circumstances change. And what you shared with them, it wasn't something ordinary. It wasn't something that could be easily replaced or forgotten. It was something that left a mark. And marks like that don't fade overnight. They stay until they are understood. And right now, they are beginning to understand. Maybe slowly, maybe painfully, but undeniably. And as this understanding grows, so will the tension inside them. Because they will have to make sense of it, they will have to decide what it means, they will have to confront the truth of their own feelings. And that is not an easy path. It is confusing, it is emotional, it is filled with moments of doubt and clarity all at once. And you are not meant to control this process, you are not meant to guide it or rush it. You are meant to witness it from a place of strength. Because this is not about going back to what was. This is about recognizing what is. And what is that you were never something temporary in their life. You were something significant, something impactful, something that still exists even after they tried to move forward without you. And that truth is now catching up to them. Slowly but surely. And as it does, more moments like last night will happen. More realizations will surface. More cracks will appear in the reality they are trying to hold together. Because once the heart starts speaking, it doesn't stop after one word. It continues. It insists. It reveals everything that has been hidden. And your name, your presence, your connection, is now part of that revelation. Whether they are ready for it or not. And the question is no longer whether they feel something. The question is how long they can keep pretending that they don't. And that is a question only time will answer. And as time continues to move forward, what once felt like a single moment begins to turn into a pattern they can no longer deny, because what happened that night was not an isolated slip, it was the opening of something much deeper, something that had been buried under decisions, expectations, and forced acceptance, and now that it has surfaced, it refuses to go back into silence. They wake up the next day thinking it might fade, convincing themselves that it was just an emotional overflow, just the weight of a life-changing event, just the pressure of a new beginning. But as the hours pass, they start noticing something unsettling. Your presence hasn't left. It lingers in their thoughts without invitation, it appears in the smallest triggers, in random moments, in conversations that have nothing to do with you, and yet somehow lead back to you. And this is where it begins to affect them in a way they cannot control, because now it's not just about what they feel internally, it starts reflecting in their behavior, in their energy, in the way they respond to the person they just committed their life to. There is a subtle distance, a hesitation, a disconnect that wasn't supposed to exist so early, and they feel it, even if they try to hide it, even if they try to act normal, even if they push themselves to be present. Something inside them is no longer fully there. And that realization brings a kind of pressure that is difficult to carry, because now it's not just about them anymore, it involves another life, another heart, another expectation that they are supposed to fulfill, and yet the more they try to step into that role, the more they become aware of what is missing. And what is missing is not something small, it is not something they can replace with effort or time, it is something that existed naturally when they were with you, something that didn't need to be forced, something that didn't feel like a responsibility but rather like a connection that flowed without resistance. And this comparison, even if they try to avoid it, becomes unavoidable. Because the mind can distract, but the heart compares. It remembers what felt right, what felt complete, what felt like truth. And once that comparison starts, it doesn't stop, it grows stronger, clearer, more undeniable with every passing day. And this is the phase where confusion turns into realization. Because at first, they questioned the moment, then they questioned themselves, and now they are starting to question the decision they made. Not openly, not in a way they can express, but internally, in a quiet, persistent way that keeps asking them the same thing again and again. Why does this not feel the way it should? And that question leads them back to you every single time. Because deep down, they already know the answer, they just haven't fully accepted it yet. And acceptance is the hardest part, because accepting it means acknowledging that they walked away from something real, something rare, something that cannot simply be recreated. And that kind of truth doesn't come without consequences, it doesn't come without emotional weight, it doesn't come without moments where they feel completely lost between what they have and what they left behind. And during these moments, your memory doesn't just appear as nostalgia, it appears as clarity. As a reminder of what genuine connection feels like, as a contrast to what they are currently trying to build, and that contrast becomes sharper with time. Because forced alignment fades, but natural connection remains vivid. And this is where everything starts shifting inside them, because now it's no longer about ignoring or suppressing, it becomes about understanding, about facing, about slowly realizing that what they tried to close is still open. And not just open, but active, alive, present in ways they cannot deny anymore. And as this awareness deepens, so does the emotional conflict, because they are now standing in a reality where two truths exist at the same time. The life they chose, and the connection they never ended. And balancing those two is not sustainable, it creates tension, it creates distance, it creates moments where they feel like they are living a life that doesn't fully belong to them. And that feeling, that subtle but constant discomfort, is what begins to change everything. Because people can ignore their feelings for a while, they can distract themselves, they can convince themselves to adjust. But they cannot live peacefully in a reality that doesn't align with their truth. And eventually, something has to give. Whether it's their denial, their resistance, or the structure they are trying to maintain. Something will shift. Because truth always finds a way to surface completely. Not partially, not temporarily, but fully. And you remain at the center of that truth. Not because you are doing anything, not because you are reaching out, not because you are interfering. But because what you represented in their life was never replaced. It was only covered. And now that cover is slowly being removed. Layer by layer. Realization by realization. Until they can no longer pretend that it's not there. And as this continues, the space between what they show to the world and what they feel inside will keep growing, and that gap will become harder to maintain, harder to hide, harder to live with. And that is where the real turning point begins. Not in a dramatic moment, not in a sudden decision, but in a quiet internal shift where they can no longer lie to themselves. Where they can no longer ignore the truth of what they feel. Where they finally understand that some connections are not meant to be replaced, not meant to be forgotten, not meant to be left behind without consequence. And you are that connection. The one that stayed. The one that returned. The one that is now reshaping everything they thought they had settled. And while they are still in the middle of this process, still trying to make sense of it, still figuring out what it means and where it leads, one thing is already clear. Last night was not the end of something. It was the beginning of everything they tried to escape. Coming back to them. Stronger, clearer, and impossible to ignore.